when I kicked down my own gate, with the fire chief shouting in my earpiece and thousands of people one pipe away from a full-blown water crisis. All I could think about was Karen's smug little padlock. She was about to make headlines for what might be the dumbest felony in HOA history. And I know what you're thinking. Wait, what? How is that even legal? And how did she not notice? Yeah, trust me, I've been asking myself the same thing ever since. I've handled pipeline burst sabotage, and even that time a bored teenager tried to mine Bitcoin with a toaster and blacked out half the grid. But nothing prepared me for one clipboard-wielding, chain-happy, middle-aged woman on a power trip. I still remember the moment vividly. The crisp, early morning air, the sound of metal crunching as I forced my way through a gate that had once been my sole means of access, and the blaring voice of the fire chief in my ear urging me to hurry. It was chaos, an emergency water crisis looming in the background because Karen, in her endless quest for petty conformity, had chained my gate shut. My farm, which normally provided life-sustaining water to nearly 1,000 neighboring households, had inadvertently become the bottleneck for a system that thousands relied on during critical hours. That surreal moment set the stage for a battle that would ripple through our community, turning a personal dispute into a stand against arbitrary power. I knew then that nothing would be the same after today. The injustice, the absurdity, and most of all, Karen's overzealous need to enforce rules at the expense of common sense would not go unchallenged. Cedar Park Estates was a picturesque, gated community nestled on the outskirts of a bustling small town. With its immaculate lawns, uniform houses, and perfectly trimmed hedges, it was a neighborhood where everything was expected to be in order, down to the tiniest detail. The Homeowners Association, HOA, ruled with an iron fist, and no one in Cedar Park was spared from its relentless pursuit of perfection. At the center of this rigorous regime was Karen Phillips, a woman in her mid-50s whose reputation for unwavering enforcement had grown legendary. Dressed every day in conservative, sharply tailored outfits and forever armed with her clipboard and smartphone, Karen considered herself the guardian of community standards. To her, anything that deviated from the meticulously maintained aesthetic of Cedar Park Estates was unacceptable. Whether it was an errant flower in a neighbor's garden or, as it turned out, a farm gate left unlocked, Karen was quick to act, and quicker to impose fines or restrictions without a second thought. I, on the other hand, was a longtime resident and the proud owner of a sprawling farm on the edge of Cedar Park. My property, known simply as Green Pastures Farm, had been passed down through generations and was not just a means of livelihood, but a legacy of independence. Here, nature intertwined with modern innovation. I had installed sustainable irrigation systems, solar panels on the barn roof, and even advanced water storage facilities that served not only my crops and livestock, but also, in times of emergency, a portion of the community's water supply. For me, my farm was an open canvas, a space where creativity, hard work, and individuality thrived. I believed that living off the land meant embracing both its beauty and its unpredictability. Over the years, I'd expanded my operations to include a community-supported agriculture stand, where neighbors could come and pick up fresh produce right off the fields. Yet, it was precisely this openness that put me at odds with the rigid rules of the HOA. Karen's latest decree had crossed a line. Without asking, or even a whisper of conversation, she had chained my main gate shut. That gate wasn't just any entrance. It was the artery through which a sophisticated network of water pipelines flowed, a lifeline that provided emergency water to thousands of people during critical hours. By locking it, Karen not only violated my property rights, but also jeopardized the safety and well-being of everyone who depended on that water. The community was split. Some admired Karen's attention to detail and her relentless pursuit of order. Others, like me, resented the intrusion into our private lives. My neighbors from both sides of the fence had grown weary of endless fines, invasive inspections, and arbitrary punishments, all justified under the guise of maintaining aesthetic perfection. I had long believed in a balance between necessary regulation and personal freedom, and Karen's overreach threatened to tip that balance irreparably. I realized that her actions weren't just a personal attack. They were symptomatic of an authoritarian mindset that had no place in our community. It was time to reclaim my rights and send a message that while order is important, it must never come at the expense of practicality, compassion, and the freedom to live authentically. The day after I discovered my gate had been chained shut, the situation escalated far beyond a mere inconvenience. I had spent the previous night combing through security footage, and every frame confirmed my suspicions. Karen Phillips, with deliberate precision, had fitted a heavy-duty padlock and chain across my gate, effectively sealing off the only entrance to Green Pastures Farm. And worst of all, this gate was crucial, not only as an access point, but as the juncture for an elaborate water distribution system that served a large part of Cedar Park Estates. By morning, I was inundated with phone calls from distraught neighbors and frantic messages from local emergency services. The community's water supply was at risk. Reports began to surface that, due to the chain gate, a critical junction in the water system was now offline, leaving thousands in a state of vulnerability during what was expected to be one of the coldest nights of the year. Enraged and determined not to let Karen's petty antics trigger a full-scale crisis, I immediately set about gathering evidence and drafting a plan of attack. I documented every detail, the exact time the chain was installed, the padlock serial number, and even Karen's vehicle approaching my property on the previous night. I turned over my detailed findings to both the local water authority and the HOA board, but I knew deep down that the board, accustomed to Karen's unchecked authority, might dismiss my concerns as an overreaction. Not willing to leave my property and my community at the mercy of arbitrary enforcement, I decided that it was time for a bold countermeasure. I had always believed that actions spoke louder than words, and so I resolved to reclaim control over my property in a way that would force the community to confront the absurdity of the situation. That afternoon, while the HOA board was still mulling over the incident behind closed doors, I activated my backup plan. Drawing on my long-standing expertise in farm management and emergency protocols, I dispatched a trusted crew of workers to my property with the clear mission to secure the water lines and keep the system functional. Simultaneously, I contacted the local fire chief, an old friend, and explained the critical situation. The fire chief, sympathetic but firm, advised me to immediately take emergency action to prevent a water crisis, warning that if the system was compromised for more than a few hours, the consequences could be dire. Fueled by the urgency of the moment, I quickly formulated a plan that would both restore access and serve as a statement to Karen Phillips and the rest of the HOA. I decided to remove the chain and padlock myself, but not before making sure that a record of the act would be captured for all to see. I knew that if I could physically reclaim my property, with the support of my neighbors and the local authorities, it would force the HOA board to acknowledge that the arbitrary punishment had gone too far. I grabbed my tools and headed out, determination etched on my face. With a deep breath and a resolute heart, I confronted the padlock. The metal clanged against the tool as I pried it open, the sound echoing like a battle cry across the still morning air. This simple act, though fraught with risk, symbolized the reclaiming of my freedom, the power to control my own property and to ensure that a vital resource remained available to all in crisis. As I removed the chain, security cameras captured every moment. I made sure to record the process, aware that this footage would serve as undeniable evidence of Karen's overreach. My actions weren't merely about opening a gate. They were about defying an oppressive force that had sought to impose its narrow view of order on our community. By the time the chain was fully removed and my gate swung open once more, news had already broken out across Cedar Park. Social media exploded with reactions. Hashtags like #UnchainTheGate and #PropertyRightsNow began trending as neighbors celebrated the reversal of what they saw as an egregious act of authoritarianism. Comments poured in from residents who had long been frustrated by the HOA's excessive regulations. Many expressed that this incident was a turning point, a moment when the community would finally stand up against petty rule enforcement. But even as I celebrated this small victory, I knew that the battle was far from over. The HOA board was set to convene an emergency meeting later that day, and Karen Phillips would undoubtedly try to justify her actions. The digital dossier of evidence, however, had already begun to coalesce into a powerful movement that demanded accountability and reform. I prepared my evidence for presentation, gathering screenshots, videos, and detailed logs, proof that a single act of authoritarian overreach had endangered not only my property rights, but the emergency water access relied upon by thousands. Every moment in that turbulent afternoon reinforced the community's growing dissatisfaction with arbitrary rule enforcement. Neighbors who had once cowered in fear of fines and inspections were now emboldened, their voices united in a demand for fairness. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown, a final confrontation where the balance of power in Cedar Park would be irrevocably shifted. In the hours and days that followed the removal of the chain, the tension in Cedar Park skyrocketed. My digital footage of the padlock's removal and the subsequent reopening of my gate circulated widely on social media. Hashtags like hashtag #UnchainTheGate and hashtag #ReclaimYourRights trended locally, igniting debates about property rights, emergency protocols, and the abuse of unchecked power by the HOA. Neighbors, previously silent and fearful, began to speak out about their own experiences of arbitrary fines and invasive inspections, a digital chorus that grew louder with every shared post. Local news channels picked up the story, their cameras panning across my reopened gate and panning to interviews with exasperated residents. This is not just about one man's property. One reporter said on air, it's a battle for every homeowner's right to control their own land in Cedar Park. The narrative quickly evolved from an isolated incident to a community-wide uprising against oppressive rule enforcement. Expert panels and local advocates joined the conversation, explaining how emergency water access was critical not only for individual farms like mine, but for the entire neighborhood, especially during harsh weather conditions. Within the HOA board, the fallout was immediate. Emergency meetings were convened, and leaked minutes from those sessions revealed a deep divide. Some board members, traditionally loyal to Karen Phillips, argued that rules must be followed at all costs, regardless of circumstances. Others, swayed by the overwhelming digital evidence and the palpable outcry from the residents, questioned whether Karen's actions had been an aberration or a symptom of a larger problem of overreach. We must ensure that our regulations serve the best interests of all our residents. One member was overheard saying, and not just the personal agendas of a few. The internal conflict put the board on the defensive with a digital petition, garnering thousands of signatures, acting as a powerful reminder of the community's will. I took to my online platforms to update everyone continuously. Video logs, live-streamed rebuttals against the HOA's justification of Karen's fine, and heartfelt testimonials from affected residents flooded the forums. Stories poured in from families who depended on the water system that my gate had once managed, a system now jeopardized by the chain that had been so carelessly installed. Our emergency water access is non-negotiable, one resident insisted in a viral post. Every second counts in a crisis, and no one should have the power to lock out essential services. Simultaneously, I prepared a comprehensive digital dossier, meticulously documenting every misstep by the HOA and every instance of overreach by Karen Phillips. My dossier included security footage of the chain's installation, time-stamped photos of my water system, and expert analysis from a local civil engineer, all of which collectively painted a damning picture of arbitrary rule enforcement. Neighbors shared and amplified this dossier, and soon it became the foundation of a new movement for accountability in Cedar Park. Karen, caught in the maelstrom of digital evidence and public criticism, was unable to spin her narrative. Her social media posts, once brimming with smug certainty, now flickered with confusion and desperation. Every time she attempted to justify the chain installation as an effort to improve safety or manage traffic, the verifiable data contradicted her claims. The community was no longer willing to accept her version of events unchallenged, and the pressure on the HOA board to take decisive action mounted by the minute. The final crescendo came when the HOA board announced that a public hearing would be held to address the incident and reform their policies regarding property modifications and emergency access. The announcement sent shockwaves through Cedar Park. In the days leading up to the hearing, local rallies, town hall meetings, and online forums were abuzz with anticipation, with residents uniting to demand that the board protect their rights and ensure that such egregious abuses of power would never be allowed again. By the time the hearing was scheduled, the digital petition had amassed tens of thousands of signatures. Every shared video clip, every hashtag Unchain the Gate, hashtag Emergency Rights, hashtag Cedar Park United, reinforced the message that our community would no longer tolerate arbitrary interference with essential services. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation that would redefine the power dynamics in Cedar Park once and for all. The decisive moment arrived on a cool, brisk morning at the Cedar Park Community Center. The boardroom was packed with HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and hundreds of determined residents, each one there to witness the final public hearing that would decide the future of property rights and emergency access protocols in our community. With unwavering resolve, Councilwoman Andrea Gomez stepped up to the podium, her eyes reflecting the collective hope and determination that had been building for weeks. After a thorough review of all digital evidence, including time-stamped security footage, detailed reports from our local water authority, and the impassioned testimonies of our residents, we have reached an inescapable conclusion. Councilwoman Gomez began, her voice steady and authoritative. It is abundantly clear that the actions taken by Mrs. Karen Phillips, namely, chaining the main gate of Green Pastures Farm, thereby disrupting emergency water access for thousands, were not based on any legitimate concern for safety, but were driven by personal bias and an absolute disregard for the rights of fellow residents. A heavy silence enveloped the room as Gomez continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will rescind all fines and sanctions resulting from this incident, and a full disciplinary review of the policies that allowed such arbitrary enforcement will be launched. Furthermore, we will implement new guidelines that ensure critical infrastructure, especially emergency water access, is never compromised by personal vendettas. Today's decision is not merely about correcting a single injustice. It is a resounding declaration that Cedar Park will always safeguard the fundamental rights of every community member. Her words struck a chord, and murmurs of deep agreement rippled through the assembly. At that moment, a longtime community advocate, renowned for his unyielding defense of civil rights, rose to speak. "Today, we stand together as one," he proclaimed, his voice strong and impassioned. "No resident should ever have to endure the consequences of arbitrary rule enforcement that jeopardizes essential services. Let this vote mark a turning point, a clear signal that our community values both individual rights and public safety above all else. We demand accountability, and we will ensure that every infringement on our rights is met with decisive, swift action." His stirring words were met with thunderous applause, solidifying the unity in the room. Following his address, a senior official from the local water authority presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of all digital evidence, including photographic logs of the blocked water junction, expert analyses of the system disruption, and detailed incident reports. The evidence was irrefutable. Karen's unilateral decision to chain the gate had directly endangered emergency water access for thousands in our community. The Internal Affairs Panel unanimously endorsed strict measures against such abuses, and the full report was set for immediate public release. Councilwoman Gomez concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Cedar Park, a community where every resident's rights and our collective safety are sacred." Our vote today sends a clear message that no one, not even a self-appointed enforcer, can override the rights of a community without consequence. Together, we stand for justice, transparency, and the unassailable right to access essential services when we need them most. Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our battle for property rights and public safety. In that defining moment, as every face in the boardroom shone with determination and hope, the balance of power shifted irreversibly. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of the community forced the HOA board to act decisively, a turning point that would forever reshape the governance of Cedar Park. The days of arbitrary fines and personal vendettas were over, and a future built on respect for critical infrastructure and individual rights was finally within our grasp. In the weeks following the historic vote, Cedar Park underwent a transformation that resonated far beyond a single incident. News of the rescinded fines and sweeping reforms implemented by the HOA board spread rapidly through local media and social networks, igniting discussions about property rights, emergency services, and the importance of protecting community infrastructure. Editorials in the local newspaper, with headlines such as "A New Dawn for Cedar Park" and "Community United for Essential Rights," celebrated the decisive measures taken to ensure that no resident's well-being would be compromised by arbitrary rule enforcement. Town hall meetings and community forums saw record attendance as residents gathered to share their experiences and envision a future where both individual freedom and public safety were honored. Neighbors, who had long lived under the shadow of an overzealous HOA, spoke passionately about their right to secure access to essential services, free from the whims of personal vendettas. Our community must be a place where safety isn't a privilege, but a guaranteed right, one resident declared at a packed meeting, his voice echoing through the room. The atmosphere was one of hope and renewal, a promise that Cedar Park would forever safeguard the rights and well-being of its people. Within the reformed HOA board and local government, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, launched comprehensive training programs on ethical governance, cultural sensitivity, and the responsible management of critical infrastructure. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary procedures were introduced to ensure that every complaint was thoroughly examined and that no arbitrary fines or actions could jeopardize community safety again. Our duty is to protect not just property, but the very lives of our residents, Lieutenant Reed stated in a follow-up press conference, reinforcing our collective commitment to justice and integrity. Community leaders and local civil rights groups mobilized even further, organizing workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns designed to empower residents and encourage active participation in shaping the new governance policies. When we unite as a community, our strength can dismantle even the most outdated systems. A local activist proclaimed during a town hall meeting, inspiring neighbors to join the movement for a more equitable and responsive administration. For me, the journey from confrontation to resolution was both deeply personal and profoundly transformative. My decision to fight back against Karen Phillips's reckless actions, not just to reclaim my property, but to ensure that emergency water access was never compromised, had become a catalyst for change across Cedar Park. Neighbors who had long suffered in silence now found their voices, sharing their own stories of hardship and resilience. The digital evidence that captured every moment of this tumultuous ordeal transformed into a powerful symbol of resistance and hope, a reminder that no one is above accountability when a community stands together. Karen Phillips, once feared as the merciless enforcer of the HOA's draconian rules, was ultimately reduced to a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that arbitrary abuse of power will always be met with resistance. Her influence waned rapidly as digital records of her past transgressions surfaced and circulated widely, underscoring the necessity of accountability and the dangers inherent in unchecked authority. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Cedar Park, residents, local officials, and community advocates gathered under the gentle glow of the setting sun. A large banner reading "Unity, Freedom, and Essential Rights" was unfurled between towering oaks, and heartfelt speeches echoed promises of a brighter future. Today, we celebrate not only the victory over arbitrary rule enforcement, but also the resilience of a community that refuses to be silenced, Councilwoman Gomez proclaimed. her voice resonating with determination. The standing ovation that followed was a powerful affirmation of our collective commitment to protect our freedoms and to ensure that no one can jeopardize the public good through personal vendetta. As each new day dawned over Cedar Park, the legacy of that fateful confrontation endured as a beacon of transformative progress. The story of how a simple act, the chaining of a gate that blocked emergency water access, led to a community-wide uprising and ultimately forced the HOA board to reform its policies became a rallying cry for every resident. Every sunrise now carried with it the promise that in Cedar Park, truth, justice, and the rights of every individual would forever prevail. In the end, what began as a personal battle against petty bureaucratic overreach evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to safeguard our essential rights against any form of arbitrary interference. And as the sun rose each morning over our reclaimed neighborhood, it carried with it the promise that Cedar Park would forever be a place where creativity, integrity, and respect for critical community services shone brightly.